Aaron Walz. Aaron grew up in a farm in rural central Illinois in an idyllic 1980s small town. Christ-centered, community-focused, sports-crazed lifestyle. From 99 to 03, he followed his childhood dream of being an Illini athlete, a basketball star. Just kidding. They didn't want somebody who was 5'10", but they did want a great athlete who was fast. So he ran track and cross country for U of I, and he graduated from the College School of Business. His competitive drive, being able to be great at math and ADD, landed him with a perfect job at Citadel. At Goldman Sachs, where he worked for 7 years before joining the evil empire of Citadel. He's worked for Citadel Securities for 16 years. In 2011, he met his wife, Kristen, who grew up in Hinsdale. They got married in 2013. Aaron and his family moved here for a year after leaving the city. And one day he was at Whole Foods and he ran into Chris Hill. Chris used to live here at a 10 men's frat. And when he was talking to Chris was like, hey, why'd you move out here, blah, blah, blah. And Chris was like, hey, you should attend men's fraternity. And so that little moment right there had a massive ripple effect. And you're going to hear more about that today. Aaron came to the frat one time, loved it, and stuck around until he moved to Barrington the next year. When he was in Barrington, I'm going to show you this picture. He called me up one day and he's like, hey, I'm interested in starting a men's group like men's fraternity. I think we can use it up here. Is that something that, I don't want to compete, I don't want to steal your thunder, I'll do it on a different day. And I'm like, dude, we'll work together and I'll give you all my material. And he took everything and made it better. And he's done a great job. They started with 4 guys in a diner up in Barrington. We started with 5 guys at a restaurant. It used to be Zach's place, it's now Bistro. And this is what, and look at, check out the logo. You're gonna see they've got their own swag, so we can step up our game. But this is what it's grown into. And that all started because one guy at Whole Foods ran into a buddy and is like, hey, you should attend this. And then Aaron made a bunch of choices along the way to build a group like that. Aaron's got 4 sons, 5 months. Easy, dog. 7, 10, and 12. And let's give Aaron a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm good on here. I don't need the handheld, right?
Correct.
Okay, awesome. I am going to have my phone up here. I never recommend doing this, whether you're at a business meeting, you're out to dinner with your family. I'm just doing it because I want to really honor the time. That's one thing I stole from PJ. He talked about a lot of things. He just said, take it. And I love how he is really disciplined with you. Start on time, you end on time. So my phone is out here. I'm just starting the time so I can make sure that I stay on task with when I talk. I was a little nervous last night because I'm still on the email list from 10 years ago, and he sent an email out that said there was an excellent speaker today. So I figured I must either have the wrong date or he replaced me, because, thank you for laughing. I was hoping that got some sort of laugh bright early in the morning. So I didn't really know, that probably is not me, but I do appreciate that, the introduction, and for, considering me hopefully a excellent speaker. We'll see at the end if that is true or not. And it's really cool to see that your son's here. Is this your first time ever? Oh my gosh, that's extra pressure on me too. But a lot of my talk, I know you guys have a lot of different speakers that come, and they'll talk on maybe a little bit more specific things or an area of life that you can really focus in on and improve. And a lot of mine is just kind of like this recap that happened because of just that simple invite of coming here and attending. And so I'm going to kind of recap, and especially I just want to honor PJ throughout this whole talk, right, about the things that he did through his leadership that changed in my life. And so, I was incredibly excited, grateful, and humble when PJ finally decided to take me up on my promise to come here and lead a session. at Hinsdale Men's Fraternity. You see, it was about a little more than like 2 years ago, I think, we met, but like Gibson's right here, right? After work, we met, we caught up, we kind of bounced ideas off each other, we talked about different things, and one of the things we talked about was kind of doing this home and home, where he would come out to Barrington and lead a session, and I would come back and return the favor here at Hinsdale with you all. And so I took him up on that right away. I mean, I was like, you're coming out that spring, so it was the spring of 2024, it'd be almost just basically 2 years ago. He came out to Barrington and led a session there, and it was just an incredible moment for me because I think for him, he got to walk into that room and see this entire room filled with people that all started because of his faithfulness. And so, it's almost emotional to talk about that. And that's something you could take from your dad. I mean, like, look at that, man. Like, the leadership that he started here in this room with 5 people turned into somebody else starting with 5 people because of his encouragement and turned into that room that he got to witness. And so the men just loved hearing from him. They got to see, it's like seeing the Godfather walk in, right? And so they got to see this guy that started it all. And so that was how, I had him come speak, and so I was wondering, like, hey, when is he going to have me come, right? And so, no, I kind of told him, like, look, you can plug me in at any time, whenever you need somebody. And so I think it was a couple weeks ago, he shot me a message, and PJ said, we had a last-minute cancellation. Hey, no pressure. Whenever they say that, that means, yes, you are going to answer, and you are going to do it. And I would appreciate if you came. And so, I mean, I was incredibly grateful to do that. When it comes to speaking in front of the group, my wife was actually talking to me last night. You finally get the kids down to bed, and she's like, do you need to go prepare? Are you ready? She's like, this is like my version of hell, getting in front of like a group of people and having to talk to everybody. And I'm like grateful. Like, I'm not nervous in that sense of like, I'm not nervous by the grace of God of like getting up in front of a group. But I do have like, as men, we have doubts, right? Will it be good enough? Will will my brain that likes to be ADD, will I stay on topic? Will I follow my script? Will I be under the time so I get you guys out of here? So you do have a lot of those doubts, but I'm excited to be here and speaking in front of you all. Show of hands. Is anybody here for the very first time? I know we have one, so we have Peter. Anybody else? Yeah, Todd, good. Okay, so I have a few that are here for the very first time. That's really cool. We do that every week. I got some of my Barrington boys that came to support. We do that, ask every session, show of hands. And we're on like a 30-session streak now of brand new people coming each time. And I think that does 2 things. One, it just kind of puts eyes in the room on somebody that's new. And so it hopefully encourages the men here to go and seek somebody out, to go say, hey, I recognize you from the soccer field. Hey, I recognize you from this civic club or whatever. And hopefully get them plugged in. And 2, it just kind of honors and it shows the men that you're inviting other people, that you're making the effort to tell other people to come out. How about, like, guys, this is your first season, you started coming recently? No? A few of you? Okay, how about like 5 years? Anybody been here for 5 years or more? All right, good. What about like the guys from the very beginning, like 10 years or more guys? Lars, I know. We have a lot of guys, 10 years or more. That's incredible. And so if you did raise your hand for 10 years, I might look familiar to you. I know some of the guys like Jamie here. I walked in, I saw DeCosta coming. He's a good guy that you want leading you into the room. He's kind of like my sergeant at arms today. So Nick and I have known each other for a long time. So I see some familiar faces. As PJ alluded to, I started coming here 10 years ago. I wanted to tell kind of that about in mid-2015, my wife and I were living in the city, and we sold our place. We actually bought a really old farmhouse. It was built in 1860 in Barrington Hills. Barrington Hills is kind of like zone minimum 5 acres, just kind of like the rural area of Barrington. We get these like super old farms and some of like the mega mansions. And so if you anybody remember the movie Road to Perdition? It was like this early 2000s Tom Hanks Chicago gangster era movie. A lot of it was filmed out there. So we bought the house that was Tom Hanks's house in the movie. That was like, they filmed a couple of very short scenes there. So, at some point I'll have to have the talk with my 4 boys about how Daniel Craig murdered Tom Hanks's wife and kid in the, what is now the baby's room of the house. But, that is the house, that we bought. We bought it as mid-2015. And so, this super old house is 1960s carpet and wallpaper. We're in the middle of renovating it. So we moved to Hinsdale for a year to live with my in-laws. I generally wouldn't recommend that. I love my in-laws, they're great. But my father-in-law was a corporate lawyer in Hong Kong, and him and his wife lived there, so it was kind of nice. We had our place to live. And so that was 10 years ago that I started here. And I want to kind of just share about how that experience, that 1 year experience of coming here looked a little different then, but still kind of the same premise. We were doing the Robert Lewis video series then, right? And so it looked a little bit different then, but that same premise and just that experience that I had that was due to like one man's faithfulness of starting this turned into a great experience for me, and that turned into wanting to start something in Barrington that we now have to this day. And that started too by encouragement. I know you said that like I called you up, we talked, but I mean a lot of us too is PJ just encouraging me when I left to, hey, you should start something like this, right? So you saw the picture before, right? That it was this was the bread basket in downtown Barrington. It's now closed. It was like this, the traditional Greek diner, greasy food, hot cup of coffee. You just sat around the table. I'd met a few guys moving there, and it was 2017, and these were Christian men. I met them at the gym. I talked about this experience that I had here with you guys in Hinsdale, and they said, hey, we should start something like that. Men need to sharpen one another. We need to be around a table. We need to do life together. We need to go through those experiences, those tough things together. And so we didn't even know, we had no plan, right? We didn't even come here with all right, it needs to look like this. We just knew that, hey, what PJ had built here was great. It resonates with men. Men need it in their lives. And so let's just kind of follow this like Matthew 18:20, where two or more are gathered in my name, I'll be present with you. Let's follow that kind of model and see where it goes, right? And so from, that diner of 5 people, which is now closed, 5 turned into 10. And 10 turned into 20. And we really got to just kind of witness this spiritual multiplication of God's favor over the group. And from there, we kind of outgrew that space, and we turned over we met at the Campus Life Center, still in Barrington, as part of a Christian ministry. It's this awesome facility that a guy just kind of donated and wanted it to be used for kingdom purposes. And we meet there. We have this awesome stage, as you saw, and it's just a great setting that we can fit a lot of guys into. The second picture you saw, that was our fall kickoff with Matt Forté. That was 193 men that come, and we routinely, just like you guys, are getting 100 to 150 men coming for each session to hear from the speakers. You heard a little bit of the background on myself, so I won't go through with much more of it. But like PJ said, I grew up on a farm in rural central Illinois. If you drove past the town and you blinked, you would miss it. It was Chenal, Illinois was the name of it. It's about a little bit less than 2,000 people, right on Interstate 55 as you're going down to kind of Bloomington Normal. And, growing up on a farm, I just, 2 incredible parents. I mean, I have to honor them as I talk today, because I'd be nothing without, my parents here. And just, thinking of them and their faithfulness, 2 parents that were hardworking farmers, living on a farm, nothing beyond a high school education. But they did have the love of God in their heart, and they did have this, the way they modeled that was through service, was just serving others. And that's an important task. It doesn't need to always look like I have to be the best speaker, I have to have the best knowledge. And to this day, my dad's, 75 years old. He hasn't mailed it in. He's down in Florida right now doing prison ministry through his church in Naples, right? I mean, he's not just mailing it in because of retirement. He's still finding ways to get involved. And so, my parents just really taught that childhood of just, your foundation is in your faith, learning the Bible and, serving others in the community, stepping up and leading and having that discipline. There's no shortage of learning discipline when you grow up on a farm. And you might not appreciate that in terms of doing chores or whatever, but there's a high correlation to, being successful in other aspects of life by just having chores at such a young age. So my wife and I like to say that's kind of how we ended up on this rural farm with chickens and goats and bees and all these things out in Barrington Hills. That's kind of you've heard the high level background on myself. So in the remaining time, and I'll check and just make sure that I'm doing okay. I'm only 10 minutes in. I have 30 to 35 minutes, right? So I'll try to stay on task here with you all. But in the remaining time, I want to cover just some of the key points and a few of the points of wisdom that I've gained in my 9 years of speakers and sessions at Barrington Men's Fraternity. And by no means I want to be super clear on this. By no means, when I said the things I've learned, I have learned a lot of things, right? And we all sit here. We've gained wisdom, we gain knowledge, right? And these are things that I've learned and I've tried to use and sharpen in my life, but by no means have I perfected them, right? I mean, you think of Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And that is definitely myself in front of you all. So that's the struggle, right? You know, if you go later on in Romans, Paul talks about in Romans 7, you know, this is like Paul, right? The greatest missionary in the history of the world. And he talks about the very things that I know not to do, I still struggle with and do in my flesh, right? And so that even highlights more so this idea. So for I do not understand my actions, I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing that I hate, right? That's the exact the quote that Paul writes later on in Romans 7. And so, you know, I stand before you as a man struggling with these things too, even as a leader, right? We tend to see, I mean, PJ would be the first to tell you as well. You look up at somebody and you think, oh, this person's got it all together. You know, they have this perfect life. And I just want to be clear on that, you know, I've learned a lot of things and I continue to progress in those things. But without men that are holding me accountable, men that are strong in my life, you know, I will fall. And I will stumble and I will find ways to mess it up in the human flesh. But the first point that I want to emphasize is invitation. You know, you kind of stole the thunder by talking about how I got here, but, you know, again, it was 2015. I'm at the Whole Foods just over here that I drove by on my way here. That was pretty cool to see it. And I run into a guy at the grocery store, Chris Hill. Does anybody remember Chris or know Chris? Yeah, some of you guys know that name for sure. And so like it wasn't like Chris and I were like really close friends or anything, but I knew him. I was actually friends with his brother. And, you know, Chris was a member at the CrossFit gym that I owned in the city for a time. We went to the same church for a spell. So, you know, the guy that you know, and he could have easily just been busy or on his phone or walked by. But he said, hey, what are you doing out here? And we talked for a brief minute. And he says, you should come to Men's Fraternity. I'll get you all the information on it, right? And so it was just that simple invitation, that taking that time to invite somebody. And he didn't know, you know, that I would accept the invitation, that I would show up the next time, or that I would come for a year, or that I would then take what I learned here to start something in Barrington the same, right? But that one simple invitation, you know, turned into hundreds of men that have been able to come, that have been able to be sharpened, that have grown, that have marriages that have been saved, that have had baptisms at our group events, that have had fathers strengthening their bonds with their kids, that have had marriages, like, all because of an invitation. And so, like, don't think that it's just too small. That simple invitation can really change things with you. The second point that I want to touch on today is this idea of, like, what's your role? And I like to share a lot of times, you know, in terms of like my role in this. I like to quote 1 Corinthians. It's 1 Corinthians 3:6. And again, this is Paul talking here. And he says that I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. Right? And so he's kind of explaining this model at the time. I mean, this is obviously like the early church. So they're like planting these things and these things are happening. And, you know, he talks about, you know, Paul's writing this and he says, like, he trained, he encouraged, he equipped, all these things that he did as the leader, and then he turned it over. Then he passes the baton and Apollos grabs it. And he continues to disciple, he continues to pour into somebody, and he builds and allows those roots to grow even deeper. And, you know, I can't, you know, talk about that, and I can't help but think of, when I think of that verse, and I use it to describe kind of how we grew at Barrington, and I think of you, and I think of PJ, and just like that Paul-like influence that he had in terms of planting those seeds, right? And then passing the baton and saying, all right, go and start this, right? I mean, you're doing it with your son. You're bringing your son here. Like, he's passing on this to the younger generation, and I encourage you guys to bring your kids here. You know, we probably have about 15 to 20 junior high school boys that come. And, you know, it's awesome to see fathers bring their sons here. Now, there's a lot of stuff, too, that happens that you want to keep the integrity of the table discussion. So put the kids that they can talk about those things they're struggling with in junior high and high school around their table, right? But bring your sons. It's cool to see. But, you know, Hinsdale Men's Fraternity only happened because God placed this skill, you know, on PJ of leadership, of this passion of leading men. And so it was that faithfulness that he had to start with 5 guys here. And so, you know, when you think of that, what's your role in planting, helping disciple, helping somebody else water, helping somebody else grow? Have your role in that process. You know, everybody has a different spiritual gift. For some it's teaching, for some it's serving, for some it's coaching your kids, youth sports. Like, take that into all those areas of your life. The third point I want to bring up today is who are you sharpening? And that is easy one because it kind of brings us to Proverbs 27:17, and that is our that's kind of like a classic men's mantra here. So these are our shirts. I know these are our shirts. This is Barrington. We can just do an HMF for you guys. I can just have them shipped here. But these are our shirts that we have. And you can see the iron sharpens iron with Proverbs 27:17 on there. We have the polos. I mean, Todd's got the quarter zip over there. So you can do hats. You can do I know you can do all these cool things. So I'll make sure to hook you guys up with that. Okay, there you go. Yeah, we don't want to see that. That's great. And it's also cool. I mean, there's a lot of times that's a conversation starter in the grocery store or whatever else. Guys tell me all the time where you say, hey, what does that stand for? BMF. It doesn't stand for bad. Some people have asked this. but you haven't seen Pulp Fiction? Yeah. So it's gonna be a great conversation starter. But that verse, Proverbs 27:17, is just like that's just like the traditional like forging men, right? Like that toughness of men sharpening one another. And so I look at that as like, how are you challenging the guys at your small group table? How are you going below just what's there? You watch that funny intro video, like I'll go off the script here a little bit and you just say that is kind of how men operate, right? We're just kind of right on that, nothing deeper than that. Let's just hang out, bro. And and it's kind of funny, but like getting below that, like what's going on? How do you sharpen one another? How are you holding men accountable? How are you lovingly, confessing to each other and calling each other out on their sin, right? Rather than, the enemy wants us to live in shame, to not feel like we can talk about these things at our table. So think about that as how you sharpen one another. How are we doing? We're doing okay here. I want to also kind of take this second half now. I'm about 12, 15 minutes left to just kind of go over some of the greatest hits, some of the things that I've taken away from the speakers, some of the things that would resonate probably the most with you guys in here, some of the highlights, I guess you'd say. If you saw that picture that we showed, that was our highest attended 193 men. That was this past fall. That was with Matt Forté. Sure, pretty much everybody in this room remembers that name, Matt Forté, Bears legend, incredible running back, has a lot of records for, this pass catching running back, this big durable guy. And, one of the things that really stood out to me when he came this fall, and I get there at 5:45 in the morning and I meet him, and he's got kind of a quiet, really humble guy, but he had this leather Bible that was just like really well worn. Like you could see that like this man was in his playbook, and this thing was not just like this pristine. He didn't bring an iPad like me with this technology. No, he brought the real thing. He brought the Bible there, and then when he spoke, you could see that his knowledge, his teaching, all flowed from his knowledge of Scripture. It was really incredible. That just stood out with me. And he talked about one of the things that he talked about was the acronym for manhood, and that was what is a real man? REAL, and the R was a real man rejects passivity. Culture wants us to be passive. Culture wants us to be distracted. Almost kind of like that video. It's funny. It's a great laugh, but that's kind of how culture wants us to be. Like, just let's hang out, let's grab a beer, let's not really figure out what's going on in each other's lives. Let's just kind of go through that way. E is engaging in God's word. Like Matt Forté talked about. I mean, like you have your playbook. If you know the playbook, if you know the other team's playbook, it's even better. You're going to win. God gives us the playbook. We know the guardrails that we need to have in our life. Are you following it? A, accepting responsibility. That's culture today. I mean, it's more so with your kids. I have young kids, so you're always trying to teach them, like, hey, we're not a victim. We're not playing the victim mentality. We accept, we accept responsibility. And then L, leading courageously. And what does that look like to lead courageously? And not just in a setting right now, or maybe like in this like church setting, but what does it mean to take your faith into the marketplace? We shouldn't act like a Christian one way and not, you should take, whether you're, medical device sales or you're a contractor or whatever, that integrity, that honesty, those values that have, those don't leave when you leave church on Sunday morning for that 1 hour and 15 minutes. Those are things you're taking with you. And you have to be the enemy of comfortable as a man. I'll say that again. You have to be the enemy of comfortable as a man. Don't be a distracted man. I don't know who this quote is attributed to, so maybe somebody does, but it doesn't even matter. It's the quote that says, if the devil can't make you bad, he'll just make you busy. And that is something that like really, really resonates with me. Is he doesn't even, like, we think of like the sin that men get caught in, right? The monies and the honeys, the two most likely things that men are going to struggle with. And yeah, that's oftentimes a lot of things that bring men down, the monies and the honeys. I like saying that, it's kind of funny, but it could just be distracting you. It could be just keeping you busy, right? And one of the things that we like to do as type A American men is kind of think about, what we can do for God or God's kingdom, and that's great, but the fact is that God just wants us to be with him first. And so what does that look like? That reminds me of another speaker we had fall of 24, Don Beebe, that came and spoke to us. And remember that name? Everybody that if you grew up in the 80s like me, you remember the iconic play that he made. They're getting blown out. The game's already out of hand, but he still chases down and causes the strip sack. And he shared, what's in his office. He's a football coach now in Aurora. And what's front and center in his office is this big framed poster or piece of art, but it's an Ian Bounds quote. And he said, the men who have done, this is Ian Bounds' quote, not Don Beebe's, he has it in his office. The men who have done the most for God in this world have been early on their knees. He who fritters away the early morning, its opportunity and freshness, in other pursuits than seeking God will make poor headway seeking him the rest of the day. If God is not the first thought and effort, if God is not first in our thoughts and efforts in the morning, he'll be last place the remainder of the day. I think that's really powerful. And look, like we're all here early in the morning, so we know that we can get up early here as a group, and so it's great to see that. But I say that to encourage you guys all and say, like, do you have a regular routine of just getting in the Word of God, right? That's a theme that kind of comes up with a lot of speakers, and it's something that's really changed in my life. And we all like to think of like this perfect, like curated moment where, you don't even need an alarm. You wake up at 5 a.m., you're just refreshed. You come downstairs, your house is completely clean, your dog doesn't wake up, your kids are still sleeping. You have the perfect cup of coffee and you just like pour into God's word, and it just, the sun almost rises as it enlightens you, right? And that's awesome, but that's not life, right? We get into life and it gets busy. And so we, sometimes for me, that means I'm just coming down and I'm pressing play on the Bible app so I can listen to my 2 chapters while I'm putting away the baby bottles right now and getting that done. Or it might look like I'm doing it on the train in the morning. But make that effort of trying to find that routine, right? Trying to find that baseline that is most similar to what you're doing, getting up in the morning and doing it. Even just this morning, I was listening to my 2 chapters on the way here, Exodus 18, and it was crazy, like just like what spoke to me then about, this is like Moses talking about, it's early on, and his father-in-law Jethro comes, and all these people are like lined up to hear from him. And his father-in-law in that morning is like saying, what are you doing? Like, you're going to burn yourself out. You need to bring in other men as leaders. And I'm like, I'm literally going to talk about this to a group, and this is what I just happen to be in the Bible, right? Like the Lord always speaks to you in different ways, and that's just what I happen to be in today. And Moses is another just a great example of him. Think about how many times he said, God, like, don't use me. Like, I'm not a good speaker. I have all these other excuses of why I'm not going to lead, why I'm not going to start a men's group, why I'm not going to do this in my life. And you know what did the Lord say to Moses? Anybody remember? He said, what's in your hand? And what was in his hand? Staff, right? What was a staff represent? Staff was a shepherd. They were nobodies, right? And he said, throw it on the ground. What happened to it? Became a serpent, right? He said, use it to cross the Red Sea. He said, use it to strike the rock and I'll give you water at Mount Horeb, right? All these things that he said, I'll use what's in your hand. I'll use the tools you have as a contractor. I'll use the skills you have as a teacher. I'll use you as a coach. I'll use you in the thing. What's in your hand? And so I asked the guys, think about that. What's in your hand? What talent did God place in your heart, in your hand that you can use? He used an ordinary object to do extraordinary things only by the power of God. And so another thing that I want to get to today is another speaker we had, Garrett Unkelbach. He was a Navy SEAL. He has an incredible podcast, The Impossible Life. I recommend that for like men's ministry type stuff. And a couple of things that he talked about were men needing to have core values and non-negotiables. And so, core values meaning having your own personal core values. Write them down, define them. Maybe you have a scripture that correlates to each one. We actually had it was so powerful for our group that we did a kind of bonus sessions at the end, and we all just sat around at the end of our 10-week season and just did that for a session as men, and then shared with one another the following week what our core values are. But you need to define those. And also talk about your family's core values. You know, like, what does it mean to be a Walz? What does it mean to be a Smith? What does it mean to be a Jones? Have fun with it. Involve your kids. You know, put a poster up or a piece of art over your kitchen table. Talk about those things with your children. You know, you can say, you know, my family values are excellent, honesty, obedience, service. And then you can say to your child, you know, hey, Billy, how did you serve today? And he's like, at the end of soccer practice, I picked up all the cones for my coach. That's great. You know, it's just something small, but it gets your kids ingraining in their head that they know these things that are the family's core values. Have some fun with it. You know, talk about these things around the dinner table. And you have to have some non-negotiables. He said the non-negotiables as well. These are things that, like, hey, this is my past, and I know I'm going to get in trouble if I do these things. This is just non-negotiables. I'm not going to be going on this trip with this set of guys anymore. I'm going to be doing these different things. I'm not going to, you know, go out to hang out at these places or whatever that is. They have the non-negotiables defined. I'm not going to schedule more than one evening activity a week away from my family. You know, these things that you need to define so that you can just go back to your playbook, and also you can share these things with the men around your table for accountability, right? Because that's what's going to help us to make sure we're on those things. For us, some other non-negotiables is you know, church attendance. Like, that's something that we're going to make sure that our family and our kids know that. Now, you know, we're blessed to go to a church that has Saturday night services too, so I'm not going to sit here and lie to you that I haven't adjusted our schedule and gone to Saturday night. But church attendance every week is a priority for us. You know, we homeschool our kids, and that's just something my wife and I have. I mean, she gets all the credit here. You know, she's got 4 boys at home. And I don't know how she does it. I'm downtown at work. But it's just one of those things that we've decided is best for our family. It's best how we want to, teach our kids and how we want to be the chief people that disciple our kids. How to handle technology with your kids. Another thing that you need to make sure you're defining your non-negotiables. You know, are they allowed to have a phone? Are they allowed to be on how much time? Are they allowed to be alone with it? All these things that need to be your non-negotiables. And another really powerful thing that Garrett taught during the season was, as men need to have your Paul, Barnabas, and Timothy in your life. And so Paul is kind of like, think about, you know, we talked about Paul before, as like this guy that's the mentor. You know, Barnabas is like your brothers, the people that are around your table that you're doing life with. And then Timothy is like the younger person. You know, Paul had that relationship with Timothy that he is mentoring. And, you know, for like right now, the Timothy in my life is this kid, David. He's a high school senior at Barrington High School. He's one of 10 boys that live in my friend's house in Barrington Hill. He's got a mission as a charity that's called the End Zone Project, where he takes kids in the west side of Chicago. They don't have fathers. Fathers have been lost to gun violence or whatever. They come live in Barrington. They attend the schools, and it's a, you know, he's an incredible man of faith. And I got to get him speaking here actually for you guys. But David's a guy that I pick up Monday, Wednesday, Friday on the way to the train. It's dark, and I get to see this 17-year-old kid from the west side of Chicago eagerly waiting. I never have to like message him. He's waiting by the door. I'm going to the train anyway. I drop him off at my buddy's gym for personal training on the way there. He wants to get ready for track season for his senior year. We get to have this conversation and talk with each other. It's a cool relationship. I love being able to do that. It's an odd blessing to me. You think about the Barnabas, right? And so, you know, I think about, I got to point out my friend Todd over here. You know, like, Todd's my Barnabas in my life. I mean, actually, it's kind of sometimes like a Paul too, because Todd's like a big brother to me. So he's kind of been through life. His kids are older, but I honor Todd, and he's just such a great friend. And so, like, this is what Barnabas does. He comes all the way out here. He supports you. You know, my kids get to see this strong man riding his Harley over, hunting with their dad, breaking down animals in the garage, having a bourbon together, praying together. He gives my boys a ride home every single time from men's fraternity because I'm going down to work. And so he's a brother in my life that I get to have and get to do life with, and I'm incredibly grateful to him. You know, I think of other Barnabases in my life. You know, the guys that were around my table, it was only 1 year here, but, you know, we have Matt, Lars, and Bill right here. Bill I've known for a long time, so I won't get into any stories that embarrass him or myself too, to be honest. But you know, I still keep in touch with these guys. Lars came out and did a session out in Barrington. And so, like, these are guys, and Jean's not here too, but he was around our table originally, and like, these are guys that we're just still in communication with 10 years later because of that one season that was here at men's fraternity. And they came today to support me, and it's just awesome to see you guys here. And I'm grateful for you guys' friendship, for sure. And then the Paul. You know, my Paul is Pastor Joe Riccardi and Rafe Chenery. If you guys ever went in the city, you might remember those names. They're at Park Community Church. Rafe, small world, he grew up in Hinsdale. He came to Christ in this very building. And so, like, now this guy is one of my spiritual mentors. And so it's, you know, those are guys that are constantly, I'm learning from. They're teaching me. They're asking me questions about my marriage. They're asking me things and making sure that I'm staying sharp. And so they're kind of the Pauls in my life. And as I try to land this plane here, one of the final things I want to talk about is priorities and alignments. Garrett talked about this. We did kind of an exercise with a guy this past fall, Sam Falsafi. And, I like that this thing, the definition of priorities is what I am least willing to fail at. And I'm going to say that again because I know I talk fast. I know I've been going through a lot of stuff. And if you can hear out one thing, obviously there's a lot of things I hope you take from this, but the definition of priorities is what I am least willing to fail at. And think about that as you think about order in my life and kind of writing down these things. You guys have a chance to talk about it. But you talk about how's your life? Is your life in order? God is a God of order. When we get out of God's order, that's when sin happens. That's when destruction happens. He tells us to be in order. When you look at your faith, when you look at your marriage, when you look at your parenting, your job, your hobbies, your friends, your extended family, all these things. What are you least willing to fail at? And the thing is like that really manifests in a very tangible way for people to see. I think I was thinking about this last night when I saw that quote, and I think of like Elon Musk. And if you were to say, we could just all stay in the room, think about Elon Musk, his companies, his children, his marriages. Which was he least willing to fail at? And what are you least willing to fail at? Put down write the center. What is the center of all those priorities that we talked about? What is second? What's third? What's fourth? This kind of keep drawing that bigger circle and write in there. And then go back and check, are those in order? And there's so much more that I could talk about, but in the interest of time, we're at 33 minutes. I need to bring this to a close. There's so many other tips and highlights that I'd love to share. And I know this is a high level of just kind of the broad view of what God has done through just me as a servant, right? These are nothing I've done by my own business. Only I'm grateful to Him. I'm grateful to other men that have poured into me, my parents, everybody else, right, that have used me. And so the final point I'm just going to share with you is each one of you guys has a powerful testimony, right? Like when you see speakers up here, and we have incredible speakers, and some of these are professional Christians or professional speakers. And so it's easy to say oh, that guy's a professional speaker. But some of the most powerful sessions, and Tim and Todd can back me up on this, are when we just get guys that are just like what I call one of us. There are guys around the table that have had just some radical transformation because of what God has used in their life or because of just some massive failure or some massive event. And them just getting up and humbly sharing it, even sometimes when they're mincing their words, maybe they're looking down more, but they're just sharing humbly. It's so powerful. So you guys all have a testimony, and don't be afraid to weaponize that and share that testimony. And so PJ, I'm incredibly thankful for this opportunity. Guys, you guys have a wonderful leader. I know you all appreciate him, but always go out of your way. So many guys just send me awesome, encouraging messages, always lifts my sails. So I'm just grateful for you. Thanks for having me out here finally, and God bless. For sure.
Great job.
Thank you.
All right, guys, we've got about 15 minutes. Questions?